Okay, leaders, let's talk about why you find it so hard to switch off at the end of the day and be present at home, and why it's not willpower, even though you might think it is. I'm Zoe Thompson, and I work with leaders. I help them to be more efficient, more effective, so that they can go home on time and take time off. Zero work, zero guilt, zero stress, knowing that they have a fully competent and confident team back in the office, keeping everything going as if they were still there. So let's talk about why it is so hard for you to switch off. Now, I am covering this from the most recent blog, so you're going to see me looking at the screen as I go through the notes. If you prefer reading, I'll pop the link into the comments below so that you can read the blog through. In this video, we're talking about why leaders do find it so hard to switch off, and why a lot of people think that it's willpower, when actually it's more likely to be identity, how they see themselves as a leader, how they operate as a leader, and the structure that is there to support and enable these changes to happen. So if you can't disconnect at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, you definitely can't take a full week off. And this is why willpower is not the solution for being able to switch off and step away from work. So tell me if this sounds familiar to you. So you check your emails just in case anything has come in. You tell yourself, I'll just take a quick look. I'm not going to respond. I just want to make sure that nothing urgent has come in. You see the message, you see the question, or you see the issue that needs addressing, and before you know it, you're responding or telling yourself it's only going to take a minute. But there you are, 45 minutes later, still working. The partner that you live with is getting frustrated. Kids have gone to bed. Your dinner's gone cold. And here we are again, finding yourself working when you told yourself you were going to log off hours ago. You tell yourself tomorrow's going to be different, and then tomorrow, same thing happens again and again and again. And that's because willpower is not the problem here. If you're constantly reactive and you're running on adrenaline, you're working late, you're starting early and not making any headway, then the issue isn't that you lack discipline. So willpower is not going to be the solution. The issue is structural and its identity. The issue is that you're operating in a way that prevents you from switching off. And so you're leading with habits that make disconnecting impossible. So this is why you can't willpower your way out of this problem. In a recent coaching session, one of my coaching clients said, I thrive on stress. I find joy in the challenges. That completely resonated with me. That was exactly why I loved working in the police. I loved the fact that it was a high pressure, fast paced environment. I thrived in that environment. I did also find joy in the challenges. But the question that I asked my client was, how sustainable is this? And the pause that followed and the facial expressions that came with it told me that that was where the challenge was. They recognized that it wasn't sustainable. They weren't high performing. They were almost addicted to that stress response of how it feels, that level of excitement, the adrenaline, the cortisol. And so then when things get calm, it's uncomfortable. It's the chaos that we need to feel alive for those of us who love that environment. But it's not high performance. It's almost an addiction to that feeling of that stress response. And the crash always comes because it's not a sustainable way to be. So another client shared that they were in a cycle of back-to-back meetings, dealing with relentless crises, constantly reacting, even though they wanted to be more like a senior leader. They wanted to work at that strategic level. They didn't want to be firefighting day in and day out. But they couldn't switch off at the end of the day, and they couldn't protect time for the strategic work. By the time they got home, the brain is still in that firefighting mode, and there's no transition, there's no decompression, just straight from chaos and disruptions and distractions and firefighting to trying to be present at home. And it didn't work. What these two clients both have in common, and what I see with a lot of leaders that I work with, is that they're all trying to use willpower and discipline for something that is rooted in their beliefs and their identity. Therefore, it comes through in their routines and their structure. Trying to switch off without changing the root cause is what makes it impossible. You're trying to fix something at a surface level without looking at the root cause. So here's the real reason why leaders can't switch off. Now, what I do when I first start working with my clients is to go through the AAA time framework with them so we can analyze where time actually goes. We need that data. I can have coaching conversations where we can talk about where they think their time is going. But until we sit down and we gather that data, it's very hard to know where the time is actually going. The AAA time framework that I use with my clients, and is also the free download on the website, helps leaders and individuals to understand where their time is actually going. And often when we do this activity, leaders are discovering that almost half of their time is going into what I call avoid activities. So this is the reactive, urgent work that drains our energy and actually is work that shouldn't be on our plate at all. So this doesn't come down to time management and the way that they organize their calendar. It's a result of the way that they lead. So when you spend half your day reacting to your team's questions and challenges, you don't have capacity, not in time, not in energy, not in focus. There's no capacity left for strategic thinking. Your brain is in reactive mode. And then the extra element of that is that when you get home, you're physically present, but mentally absent, still processing, still problem solving, still on high alert. And you can't switch off because your day never gave you the chance to switch on that strategic mode. So you're getting home and your head is still full of unresolved, unactioned, important work that never got done. So let's look at some of the structural reasons why leaders can't switch off. So firstly, they've made their team depend on them for everything. If your team can't function without you, you can't disconnect. Every time you try to switch off, the messages are going to come in, the questions pile up. You're the bottleneck. So everything stops when you're not available. Secondly, you're still leading with a problem solver identity. Now, you'll hear me talk about this a lot because this is a very common issue. You got promoted because you were excellent at problem solving. You were fast, you were quick, you were effective, you got it done. However, at this level of your leadership, that identity is going to keep you trapped. It keeps you on the dance floor rather than being on that balcony, being able to look ahead, being able to horizon scan and being able to fix the problems before they happen. You don't want to firefight at this level of your leadership. You don't want to jump in to fix things. You don't want to be responding immediately, and you definitely don't want to be the go-to. So this identity is what doesn't allow you to switch off because the structure that you have in place puts you at the center of everything that your team are doing. Thirdly, you're operating without effective systems. Systems are important. We know in a workplace, the processes, the systems, the way that we work is incredibly important. And it's the same for how you work and how you lead your team. If everything is running through you and there is no structure that allows things to continue without your involvement, you are the system. So when you try to switch off, the system breaks because you're taking the key element of the system out of the equation. If the system is not effective, or you have put yourself into the center of that system, it's not going to be effective, it's not going to be efficient, and it's not going to allow you to switch off. You may not be protecting your boundaries. You're telling people that you won't work evenings or weekends, but then as soon as something comes in, you respond. You say you'll disconnect on weekends, but you're checking your phone just in case. Your boundaries have zero accountability, no protection, and they collapse the moment any sense of pressure arrives. Something else that is common is people operating in the fast lane. Now, at a certain level of leadership, you're not in the fast lane. You need to be in that center lane. You need to be working to a time that is sustainable. You need to be working in a way that is sustainable and being able to horizon scan and see the road ahead. My performance flow framework has 3 gears: accelerate, maintain, and sustain. Now, as I said, most leaders are defaulting to that accelerate pace all of the time, and that's not high performance. That's fast lane to burnout. So you can't switch off if you are constantly in that accelerate mode. And the other common sign that I see from leaders that I work with is trying to prove their worth through availability. Deep down, there is a belief that being available is what makes you valuable. Being needed is what makes you important. So that's why they keep their phone on. That's why they're checking emails just in case. And that's why they're responding on weekends, because if they're not available, then they're not valuable. One of the clients that I was working with said exactly this. I give up my weekends too quickly. And it wasn't because they lacked willpower. It's because they hadn't yet addressed the belief that being available equals being valuable. And so they hadn't addressed the root cause that was keeping them in reactive mode. That's what we worked on. That's what we shifted. And that's when everything changed for them. Let's talk about what not switching off is really costing you. I ran a poll on LinkedIn and I asked the question, what would success look like for you right now? And the options were being present when I'm home, taking time off without guilt, having my weekends back, or finishing work on time. Now, 55% chose being present when they're at home. 35% said they wanted to take out time off without feeling guilty. 10% said they wanted their weekends back. None of them answered finishing work on time. So 55% chose being present at home. So the problem isn't leaving the building, it's leaving the work behind mentally. Not a physical movement away from work, it's mentally moving away from work when they're at home. So not present at home, physically there, but not mentally there. And the people who we live with notice. We're in the room, but we're not really there. We're still problem solving, still processing, still on high alert. And even if we don't live with people, the hobbies and the self-care that help us to recover disappear entirely. And we start to see this through our stress levels, our ability to cope, and our health and well-being. It's a huge cost. Our energy for the next day tanks. When we don't properly disconnect in the evening, we don't recover. We're starting the next day already depleted. And then we're wondering why we can't focus and why we can't give things our attention and why we're making mistakes, let alone why we can't think strategically. Another challenge is that our relationships suffer. We sacrifice partner time, we sacrifice parent time, but also it can impact the relationships with our team. Our team can feel stretched and tired because if we don't switch off, then nobody else can switch off either. And then it creates this always on culture and an unwritten expectation that people need to be also working evenings and weekends. And then burnout starts to creep in. We notice that burnout creeping in, and sometimes even though we can see it coming, it's very hard to change that pattern of behavior, to change those habits and behaviors. And we keep sacrificing our evenings, our weekends in that downtime, despite knowing the cost and despite seeing it coming. The big week off becomes impossible. You can't switch off on an evening for a couple of hours, then switching off for a full week is not going to be possible. You get the guilt, you get the fear, and then you get the what if something urgent comes up, and then you start checking in. Another poll that I ran also on LinkedIn before Christmas was to ask the question, can you fully disconnect over Christmas? 50% said yes, not negotiable. 20% were working towards it. 20% were planning to work. And 10% said they would be checking just in case. Now, if half of the leaders can't fully disconnect during Christmas, which is traditionally the one time in the UK when a lot of businesses shut down and everyone takes time off, if you can't switch off then, when can you? It's a question to ask yourself. Let's look at how leaders can actually switch off and look at some frameworks that I use that help my clients to make that change. Switching off requires a change in structure, in systems, and in identity. As I mentioned before, I use my AAA time framework to protect that strategic work. Ascend time is the strategic work that only you can do. It's protected. It's not negotiable. We block it out in the calendar and we make sure that it is protected during the day, not in the evenings, not once everybody else has gone home, during the day. Anchor time are the supportive tasks that we need to do to keep the momentum going. We have ascend time that drives momentum, and we have anchor time that keeps things going. Some of these things we can delegate to the team, and other things we need to do, but they are ultimately tasks that have to be done to keep the business going. And then we have avoid time. These are often the reactive patterns that are what are keeping people trapped. It's answering questions team can answer themselves. It's solving problems that they could solve. And for some people, this can be up to 50% of their day. Shouldn't be there. And that's before we even take the meeting times out of the daily allocation. If you were to track your time for 1 week, how much of your time goes into avoid activities? Doesn't even need to be 1 week. The download on the website that I mentioned earlier guides you through doing an audit over 3 days. If you just were to look at the time that you have in work, if you were to just look at where your time goes over 3 days, it will give you enough data to tell you where your time is going. And then you can start looking at where your time needs to go. Secondly, the performance flow framework to find a sustainable place. So I mentioned the accelerate, the fast lane. Now, this is okay for your sprints, for your deadlines, for those critical periods. It is not your default way of working. Your default way of working is maintain. It's the middle lane. It's a sustainable pace, keeps momentum going without burning out. This is your default. And then we have sustain. We have the recovery lane where we intentionally go slower. We go at a slower pace to rebuild energy. It should follow the periods in the fast lane. It may also go before the periods in the fast lane so that we are energized and we are ready to go. We want to be spending the majority of our time in the middle lane. Now, as I said, most leaders default to accelerate. They are constantly at that fast pace. They cannot switch off, constantly in the fast lane. And so this is the stress addiction. Remember the client that I mentioned earlier? When calm feels really uncomfortable, that's what happens when you have no sustain built into your routine. You need daily moments of calm and recovery, not just the one occasional hobby where you completely switch off. You need that on a regular basis. Ideally, you need to build that into each day. Now, to do that, you need to protect your boundaries with structure. Your boundaries need protection. One of the things that I talk about is that your boundaries are the invisible line between you and other people that protect, preserve the things that are most important to you. We need to be very clear on what those are, and then we need to be very clear that we hold that boundary in place to protect those things. It will look different with different times, with different people, but we are still protecting the same thing behind that boundary wall. We need to communicate our boundaries and we need to hold those boundaries. And to be able to hold those boundaries, we need a structure in place to be able to do that. Now, this is how it works in the workplace. So have an end of day ritual. Now, you can use my 4P reset to close your working day. Take a pause to reflect and review the progress 1 hour before you're due to finish. If you're due to finish at 5, at 4 o'clock, have something in your diary that reminds you to pause and reflect and review how the day has gone. How have you progressed with the priority tasks? How are you getting on? And what still needs to be done? Once you've taken that pause, then you can prioritize what still needs to be done that day, what needs finishing in that final hour, and what are you going to carry forward to tomorrow? You can prioritize. Pause, prioritize. Once you've done that, you can proceed with purpose. You can complete those final priority tasks, and then you close your laptop, you turn off those notifications, and you transition intentionally into home mode. Something else that works really well for some of my clients is switching off their notifications after a certain time. You can't mentally switch off if you can hear your phone buzzing in the other side of the room or in your jacket pocket. I would also consider protecting your weekend. Saturday mornings are not for catching up, and Sunday evenings are not for getting ahead. If you have that belief that that is okay to do that, that's what helps you catch up and what helps you get ahead of the week, then you are going to give yourself permission to have the habits and behaviors that mean it's okay to log on at the weekend. Protect your weekends. Set aside some protected time on a Friday afternoon and a Monday morning to complete these activities. Give yourself that time to do those tasks. Do not give yourself permission to do them on the weekend. And one of the most important things is looking at your team capability. This is a fundamental piece of the jigsaw puzzle. If your team can't function without you, then you can't switch off. I talked about this in a previous vlog and blog, so do go and check that out. But if your team can't function without you, that's where you also need to start looking at. And finally, address the identity issue. You can't switch off if your identity is tied to being needed, being helpful, being the go-to person, being the problem solver. If being available equals being valuable in your mind, you'll never switch off. There is an identity shift that is required. You need to move away from being the reactive problem solver and into being that intentional leader who develops capability in others and is able to work at that strategic level, thinking ahead, fire prevention, not firefighting. When your worth is not tied to being constantly available, that is when the switching off becomes possible. This is what happens when leaders make the shift. Now, one of my clients described themselves as being constantly reactive and running on adrenaline. They were working late, starting early, not making headway. They worked with me over the 8 weeks on the Elevate Your Efficiency Leadership Program. We identified in that first week where their time was going and how they wanted to use that time more effectively. My aim on the program is to help them to be more efficient, to be more effective, so they get an hour of their day back, either to go home on time or to work on those strategic tasks. Now, over the course of the 8 weeks, we made lots of changes to be more efficient and more effective and being able to prioritize what was most important to them rather than spending time on other people's priorities. After the program, they said that they were seeing a more organized diary and a better structure in their work. Most importantly, they took a full week off, stress-free, guilt-free, and with everything planned and running smoothly. They came back from their holiday feeling completely in control and not panicking. Team had done an amazing job keeping things going. And the first thing they did was looked at when they could take another holiday, because now they've got that trust and reliance in their team to know they've got things handled. This is what happens when you address the structural and identity level causes. Somebody else on the program, they were in a cycle of back-to-back meetings, dealing with relentless crises, constantly reacting. Now they got the time back, less meetings, and more conscious and deliberate of where they're spending their time. This is where the shift starts to happen. We become more efficient, more effective, so that time comes back. Then with that time, we make sure we go home on time, we make sure we switch off, and we make sure that we've got an empowered, confident and competent team that can keep things going so that we can take a full week off and step away for a complete break. When you make this shift, your days change. You finish the strategic work that needs to happen during working hours, not in the evenings. Then your evenings change. You're actually present at home, not physically there, and mentally absent. And your energy changes. You recover properly. You start the next day ready, not depleted. Your team changes because they become more capable, more confident, more independent, and they stop needing you for everything. And that's when the big week off becomes possible. Zero work, zero stress, zero guilt. And it isn't because you suddenly have more willpower or you become more disciplined. It's because you've built the systems, the structures, and worked on the identity that makes switching off possible. Here's 5 actions you can take this week that will help you to start making the change. Firstly, track your time. If you want to, you can go and download the free audit from the website. I'll put the link in the comments. I want you to look at how much of your day goes into avoid activities or the reactive work that really shouldn't be on your plate. And that is what's stealing your time. Create an end of the day ritual. Use my 4P reset. Close your working day intentionally. Don't just drift from work mode into home mode. Turn the work notifications off on evenings and weekends. Turn it off so you can't see it and you can't hear it. And ask yourself, if you took a week off tomorrow, what would happen? When you answer that question, it's going to tell you what problems need to be addressed. And identify your identity issue. Are you still leading as a problem solver? Is your worth being tied to being needed? find out what the root cause is. We hold beliefs that drive the way that we think, the way that we feel, and the way that we behave. If we do not deal with the root cause, those root beliefs, it's very hard to change the way that we feel and the way that we behave. Focus on changes to your structure. We want those surface level changes. We also want to challenge the thoughts and the beliefs that are driving the habits and behaviors that we want to change. And when you address the structure, the systems, and the identity that's keeping you trapped in this reactive mode, then switching off becomes a lot easier and more natural. And that's when the big week off becomes possible. 0 work, 0 stress, and 0 guilt. If you want support building the systems and structures that make you a more effective leader so that you can switch off, go home on time and take that big week off and work more at that strategic level, check out the website for the next cohort of the Elevate Your Efficiency Leadership Program, or pop me a message and we can talk about the different ways to work with me. In the meantime, there are lots of free resources here on the YouTube channel and on the website, the podcast each week, and the blog, which you can check out, always talking through the light bulbs and lessons learned from the clients that I work with. And please do subscribe so that you don't miss out. And you're very welcome to share this with other leaders if you feel the content would be of use to them. There's new content being released every week, so I will see you again very soon.